2:13 in the morning. The ER doors didn't slide open the way they were designed to. They slammed against the walls hard enough to send a crack running through the safety glass, hard enough to rattle the overhead lights on their brackets, hard enough to wake every instinct in everybody standing within 50 feet of Trauma Bay 4. The gurney came through like a battering ram, wheels shrieking against polished tile. 4 people running alongside it, hands pressing gauze, voices cutting through each other in the shorthand of people who have abandoned complete sentences as a luxury they cannot afford. 3 GSWs, male, late 30s, no ID, possible military. The man on the gurney was built the way certain men are built, not for appearance, but for endurance. Wide through the shoulders, thick through the chest. Hands that even now, slack and unconscious, carried the memory of a grip that could hold on through anything. His name was Colt Merritt, though nobody in this building knew that yet. What they knew was the blood, soaking through field-packed gauze at his right flank, seeping through the pressure bandage on his upper arm, and pooling, dark and immediate, around a third wound that nobody wanted to look at directly. 2 inches left of the sternum, BP 70 over palp and dropping. Doctor. Howard Slade was already gloved by the time the gurney cleared the bay threshold. 15 years as chief of trauma surgery at Riverside General had carved him into a specific kind of man, precise, decisive, and constitutionally incapable of doubt. He moved with the fluid authority of someone whose competence had never seriously been questioned, which was both his greatest strength and the thing that would almost kill Colt Merritt before the night was over. The bay filled fast. Residents, techs, an anesthesiologist at the head of the table, the practiced chaos of people who had done this before and would do it again, ordered beneath the surface of the noise. Nobody paid particular attention to the nurse at the far edge of the bay. She had come in quietly, the way she always did. Efficient, contained, occupying exactly the space she needed and not an inch more. Her name badge read Novak, C.R.N. Below that, a smaller notation, 7 MOS, 7 months. The kind of tenure that made senior staff assume they already knew everything relevant about her. Her name was Claire Novak. She was 34 years old, though she carried herself with the stillness of someone considerably older, the stillness of a person who has been in rooms louder than this one and learned that panic costs seconds you cannot buy back. She didn't reach for instruments. She read the monitor. Slade worked the way surgeons of his caliber work. Fast, clean, decisive. The first round came out of the right flank with minimal vascular compromise. A clean extraction, controlled bleed, textbook. The second round, lodged in the upper arm, required 12 minutes and careful maneuvering around the brachial, but it came out intact, no arterial shear. The monitor steadied for 20 seconds, long enough to make hope feel like a rational thing. Then the imaging screen loaded. The third round sat 3 millimeters from the left anterior descending artery. The room temperature didn't change, but something in it did. 3 millimeters, the width of a wooden match. The difference between a man going home eventually and a man not leaving this table. The LAD, the artery cardiologists sometimes call the widowmaker, sat right there, just beyond the bullet's edge, waiting to be touched by the wrong instrument at the wrong angle. Slade stared at the image for 4 seconds. That was enough. "If we touch that," he said, voice low and flat, "we shear the LAD. He bleeds out before the anesthesia can compensate. We close the first 2, we stabilize, we transfer." A resident near the back said quietly, "Transfer time is 40 minutes minimum." Nobody said what everyone was thinking. 40 minutes was not available for purchase tonight. Claire was watching the monitor. Not the wound, not the imaging screen. The monitor. She had been watching it since the gurney came through the door, tracking the numbers the way you track them when training has made pattern recognition automatic. The systolic pressure wasn't behaving the way hemorrhagic shock behaved. It was trembling, yes, but it wasn't collapsing the way pure volume loss collapsed it. There was something structural in the instability, a pressure compensating, redistributing, holding a fragile equilibrium that shouldn't have been possible given the location of the wound. She had seen this before, not in a hospital. In a place where the lights ran on generators and the ceiling was canvas and the instruments were whatever had survived the last resupply drop. She said it quietly, not to anyone specifically, just into the room. "He's tamponating." Slade didn't look up. "Nurse, step back." She didn't move. "The round is sealing the rupture," she said. Her voice carried no apology, no tremor, no performance of deference. It was the voice of someone stating a fact they have already verified. Pericardial tamponade is maintaining forward flow. The bullet isn't accelerating the bleed, it's containing it. If you close and transfer, the tamponade progresses in transit without surgical access. He arrests in the ambulance. The bay went still in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. Slade turned slowly. He was not a man accustomed to being interrupted by anyone, let alone a nurse with a 7-month badge. His expression wasn't fury yet. It was the dangerous calm of a man deciding whether what he'd just heard warranted engagement or immediate dismissal. He chose dismissal. "Step back," he said again. Quieter this time, which was worse. Claire met his gaze. "If you extract without decompressing the pericardial sac first," she said, "you trigger immediate cardiac collapse. There is a third option." A resident swallowed audibly. "Create a controlled pericardial window," Claire continued. "Decompress the sac in a managed sequence. Cross-clamp the proximal LAD for under 15 seconds. You'll have a clean surgical window to remove the round without shearing the artery." Nobody in that room moved. Because that was not the language of 7 months of nursing orientation. That was field language. The language of a tent in the dark with a man bleeding on a folding table and a decision that needed to be made in the next 90 seconds, or it stopped mattering. Slade's eyes narrowed. "That protocol isn't in civilian surgical residency," he said slowly. "Where did you learn that?" Claire was already at the scrub sink, long, methodical strokes. The kind of scrub-in that lives in muscle memory, the kind you perform 10,000 times before your hands stop being aware of it. "Somewhere loud," she said. She did not elaborate, did not offer credentials, did not defend herself or ask permission. She simply scrubbed, controlled and deliberate, and waited. The monitor dipped. Not dramatically, not yet. But enough. Slade looked at the screen, looked at her hands at the sink, looked at the numbers again. "You assist," he said, voice tight as a cable under tension. "You speak only when I ask." She stepped into position across the table from him. "Pressure dropping," the anesthesiologist called. "I see it," Slade said. He cut. Claire leaned forward, slightly left, there. The incision found the pericardial sac. It bulged outward like something that had been holding its breath for too long. "Window," Claire said. Slade hesitated, a fraction of a second. The monitor wavered. He incised. Dark blood spilled immediate and thick. The sac decompressed. The systolic number found a ledge and held. "Clamp ready," Claire said. He positioned. Looked at her across the table just once, in a way he would never entirely explain to himself afterward. 3, she said. "Steady. Clamp. 2. Suction. 1." He extracted the bullet. The room held its breath. 1 second. 3, 5, 8. The heart rhythm dissolved into a flat, merciless line that stretched across the monitor like a verdict. "No pulse," the anesthesiologist announced. A resident swore. Slade's face went the color of the tile floor. And Claire moved. Not the broad, percussive motion of CPR, not blunt force dressed up as procedure. 2 fingers precisely placed at the myocardium, a focused, deliberate pressure along the ventricular wall, not forcing contraction, guiding it. The technique of someone who has held hearts together in conditions where the power was out, and the instruments were improvised, and the only thing standing between a man and the dark was a pair of steady hands. "Come on," she breathed. The monitor flickered. Once, twice. A rhythm returned, weak and ragged and uneven, stumbling through its own beats like a man finding footing on broken ground, but alive. Unmistakably, stubbornly alive. The room exhaled in pieces. Slade stood with his hands at his sides and stared at her fingers like they belonged to someone with an entirely different history than the badge on her collar. The windows began to shake. The first vibration was subtle enough to dismiss. Then closer. Then a sound that bypassed analysis entirely and went straight to instinct. Rotor blades, heavy, military cadence, directly above. A nurse near the bay door whispered, "Is that on the roof?" Nobody answered. Claire did not look up. Her eyes stayed on the monitor, on the fragile rhythm she had pulled back from nothing. Outside, wind kicked hard against the windows. The overhead lights trembled in their fixtures. And beyond the surgical corridor, boots struck tile, not the soft shuffle of hospital staff, but the flat, deliberate impact of people for whom every second was already allocated. The OR doors opened. The man who entered did not rush. He had evolved past the need to announce himself through urgency. He was somewhere in his early 60s, dark civilian jacket, hair cut close and going silver at the temples, posture formed by decades of decisions with real consequences attached. He moved through the room the way a storm front moves, not aggressively, but with the certainty that everything would arrange itself accordingly. Admiral Frank Coulter. His eyes went to the table first, to the monitors, to the numbers. Then they found her. He said her name the way you say a name you have rehearsed privately, in the dark, more times than you would ever admit. Claire. Slade's head came up. His eyes moved between them, calculation moving fast across his face. "You know my nurse?" The irritation in his voice carried the quality of a man defending a room he suddenly wasn't certain was his. Coulter didn't look at him. "Status," he said. It landed on Slade with the weight of a direct order, and the surgeon answered it. "He coded," Slade said. His jaw tightened around the admission. "We extracted the third round. A pause. 15 years of professional identity rearranging itself in real time. "Assisted." Coulter stepped forward, careful of the sterile field, eyes moving to the pale face on the table. "Chief Petty Officer Colt Merritt," he said quietly, confirming a man was still in the world. "3 tours. Long-range recon, best shot I ever put in the field." The name settled over the room with weight that hadn't been there a moment ago. History. The gravity of a person who had been doing something dangerous and important, somewhere these people would never see. Claire adjusted the pressure on the ventricular wall by a fraction. A tremor in Merritt's chest, the heart testing its own rhythm. "Rhythm is weak," she said. Not to Coulter, to the monitor. "But it's holding." "It needs to hold," Coulter said. His voice had dropped below the command register, into something that was neither clinical nor professional, and more honest than both. Outside the OR, naval personnel moved through corridors with quiet efficiency. Hospital administrators appeared at the threshold in clusters, speaking in low voices about jurisdiction and liability. The ordinary machinery of the building being gently, firmly set aside. Slade pulled off one glove slowly, watching Coulter, watching Claire. The architecture of the last 40 minutes reorganizing into a shape nothing in his experience had prepared him for. "You were military," he said to her. Not a question. Claire did not look up from the monitor. "I was where the bleeding happened," she said. Not an answer. Something more truthful than one. Coulter stood very still. In the controlled, composed face of a man who had navigated 40 years of operational command, something moved beneath the surface. The grief of a person who had spent a long time not knowing where someone went. He had believed she was gone. 12 years. And here she was, holding his best sniper's heart together in a civilian hospital under fluorescent lights, with a badge that said she'd been doing this for 7 months. The rotors on the roof went quiet. The monitor beeped its unsteady, determined rhythm. Trauma Bay 4 held the silence of a room that has just witnessed something it doesn't yet have the language for. They moved Colt Merritt at 3:07 in the morning. carefully, the way you move something irreplaceable across uncertain ground. The ventilator hummed its steady rhythm as the bed rolled out of the OR and into the corridor, lines intact, monitors portable. Naval personnel falling into position at both ends of the hallway without being asked. Claire walked beside the gurney, one hand near the IV pump, not touching it, just near it. She was watching the bag, not Merritt's face, though she registered the color of it, still pale, but differently pale than 40 minutes ago. Not the ventilator readout, though her peripheral vision tracked it automatically. She was watching the IV bag hanging from the pole, the anticoagulant infusion running since intake, and something about it was pulling at the edge of her attention the way a sound that's slightly wrong pulls at the ear before the mind can name what it heard. The fluid clarity, thinner than it should have been. Not dramatically, not in a way that would photograph wrong or read wrong in a chart notation. Just thin in the specific way she had learned to recognize in places where the supply chain was long and verification was minimal, and what was on the label was not always what was in the bag. She said nothing yet. Not without proof, not in a building full of professionals who had spent the last hour recalibrating their understanding of who she was. She noted it, kept walking, kept watching. The ICU on the 4th floor had been reconfigured in the 12 minutes it took to bring Merritt up from the OR naval personnel at both corridor junctions, the charge nurse working from a posture of professional neutrality that said she had decided to cooperate with whatever federal protocol had taken residence in her wing. Civilian staff, moving with the careful self-consciousness of people who understood the rules had changed but hadn't yet been told the new ones. They settled Merritt into the room at the end of the hall, monitors reconnected, ventilator transferred to the wall unit, arterial line confirmed. The small, contained ecosystem of a man being kept alive by the combined effort of machinery and chemistry and whatever stubbornness had carried Colt Merritt through 3 combat tours. Slade stood near the window with his coat half off, watching the staff work with an expression that had given up on pretending it understood the full shape of the night. Admiral Coulter took a position near the door. Not in the way. Present the way a man stands when he is waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Claire checked the arterial line, confirmed the ventilator settings, ran her eyes across the readouts in sequence, and then she looked at the IV bag again. "Stop that infusion," she said. Slade turned from the window. "Why?" "His pressure is dropping." She stepped closer to the pump. "Without external cause. There's no bleed site that accounts for this rate of decline. He just came off a trauma table." The words carried the slight edge of a man trying hard not to revert to his earlier posture. "Systemic instability is expected." "Not this pattern." Claire leaned closer to the bag, examined the label, examined the fluid against the light, the viscosity of it. "This isn't standard heparin dilution. That's what pharmacy prepared." She reached up and disconnected the line, swift and clean. She replaced it immediately with a sealed saline bag from the crash cart, cracked the seal herself, verified the contents before she ran it. Slade started to speak. She held up one hand, not aggressively, asking for 90 seconds. They passed in silence. On the monitor, Merritt's blood pressure, sliding in the slow, almost imperceptible drift of something that didn't want to be noticed, steadied, not dramatically. The number simply stopped its decline and held. The room understood what that meant before anyone said it. Slade stared at the disconnected bag. His face moved through several things and arrived at something quieter and more disturbing than anything that had preceded it. "That's impossible," he said, not defensively. "The way a man informs the universe, it has made a structural error." "Pharmacy logs every compound." Coulter's voice dropped an octave. "A log doesn't mean untouched." He didn't raise his eyes from the bag when he said it. The implication moved through the room on its own. Naval security sealed the medication supply room access before the sentence finished. 2 personnel at the stairwell entrance, 1 at the service elevator. Efficient and quiet. The way you close doors when you're not yet certain who inside the building you can trust. The ICU felt smaller, not because of the additional bodies, because of what trust had just been subtracted from it. Who had access to that infusion before it reached this room? Claire asked. Slade answered slowly, each name landing heavier than the last. The pharmacy technician on overnight shift, the charge nurse who verified the order, the on-call resident who signed the administration log, and the consulting specialist attached to Merritt's case upon intake, a physician brought in to evaluate the cardiac implications of the chest wound. Dr. Gregory Ash, Coulter read from the admission chart. Cardiothoracic, visiting rotation. Claire looked at the chart without touching it. How long has he been on rotation here? Slade considered. 6 months. She stored it without reacting. Moved on. The security officer came in at 3:41 with a tablet. He addressed Coulter, but angled the screen toward the room. Sir, we pulled footage from the supply corridor. 14 minutes before the infusion reached this floor, there was an unauthorized entry to the medication preparation area. The image was the gray, grainy currency of hospital security cameras at 3 in the morning. A figure in scrubs, cap low, mask in place. Standard issue everything, which was exactly the point. The face was unavailable. The build was average. Nothing that would stop you in a hallway. Claire looked at the image for a long time. Not at the face, at the posture, the angle of the shoulders, the way the arms hung at the sides. And then she found what she had been moving toward without knowing it, a detail that had been assembling itself in the back of her mind since the moment she heard the name Ash attached to a cardiothoracic specialty and a 6-month visiting rotation. Freeze it, she said. The officer stopped the frame. She pointed at the lower chest of the figure. A hospital ID badge, visible at the corner of the image, clipped to the scrubs at the hip, not chest high where pharmacy technicians wore them for scanner access, not at mid-torso where nurses clipped them for visibility, at the hip. The unconscious, habitual position of someone who had spent thousands of hours at an operating table where a badge at chest height contaminated the sterile field and the adjustment had become permanent and invisible, the kind of thing you stop noticing about yourself entirely. That's not a pharmacy technician, Claire said. Slade stepped forward. How can you tell? Badge position. Pharmacy wears them at chest height for scanner access. That one is clipped at the hip. She kept her voice level. It's a surgical habit, automatic, the kind that follows you out of the OR whether you want it to or not. The room went very still. You're saying a surgeon tampered with his infusion? Slade's voice had come down to almost nothing. I'm observing, Claire said. The footage will confirm or eliminate. But the security officer was already cross-referencing, timestamp against staff access logs, against badge swipes, against sign-in records for every physician on the floor during the relevant window. 4 minutes. One surgeon logged in the vicinity of that corridor during that period. Dr. Gregory Ash, with his published research, his prestigious institutional affiliations, his military medical consultation history that had made him appear, if anything, more appropriate for exactly this kind of case. Credentials designed to make trust feel like the rational response, which was precisely the function they had been built to serve. Colt Merritt's heart rate spiked, not from physiology, not from blood loss or fluid shift. It spiked the way a heart rate spikes when the body processes a threat before the mind catches up with it. His eyes came open, wide, straining against the sedation with the effort of a man trained to override his own signals who had made functional decisions in conditions far worse than this. He blinked against the fluorescent light. His gaze moved, not the unfocused drift of anesthesia wearing off, but the deliberate tracking of a man searching for something specific. He found the glass door of the ICU room, and he looked through it. Claire followed his eyes. At the far end of the corridor, partially screened by the reflection of overhead lights on glass, partially obscured by the movement of personnel through the hallway, a figure stood in scrubs, not moving, not speaking. not displaying any of the behavioral signatures of a person who has just been named as a suspect and doesn't know it yet. Just standing, watching. Still in the way of someone running calculations, someone deciding whether the operation was recoverable or whether it was time to move to the exit phase. For a fraction of a second, long enough to be definitive, short enough to be deniable, the figure's eyes met Claire's through the glass. She saw the recognition in them. Then doctor. Gregory Ashe turned from the window and walked. Calmly, evenly, with the unhurried pace of a man who is simply done with his shift, toward the stairwell at the end of the hall, the same measured pace that had served him for 6 months in this building, the performance of unremarkability sustained to the end. Coulter's voice cut through the room, quiet and absolute. "Stop him!" The hallway erupted in controlled motion. Naval personnel pivoted from their positions with the efficiency of people for whom this instruction required no processing time. Boots struck tile in sequence. Radios crackled in clipped shorthand. Claire didn't move. She turned back to Merritt, one hand against his wrist, feeling the pulse, elevated, uneven, present. His eyes were trying to track her, fighting the sedation with everything he had left. "You're safe," she said softly. His pulse steadied fractionally under her fingers. The stairwell door hit its frame somewhere below with a sound that traveled up the concrete shaft like a warning. Then footsteps, running. Then the brief, controlled sounds of a takedown that produced no gunfire, no shouting, just the professional language of 2 trained people bringing a third to ground near the service elevators in the basement, and then silence. Less than 4 minutes from the moment Ashe turned from the glass. They brought him back through the corridor at 4:03 in the morning, wrists secured, mask removed, under the flat light of a hallway that had seen more in the past 2 hours than in the previous 6 months combined. The face beneath the mask was calm, not the calm of innocence, the calm of a man who had run the scenario far enough forward to know where it ended and arrived at the ending with something that looked almost like professional disappointment, not fear, not remorse. The disappointment of someone who had worked carefully and at length and found the margin was not where he had placed it. Coulter met him in the corridor, didn't move toward him, didn't raise his voice. "Who sent you?" he asked. Ashe looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, a small internal recalibration. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. Then nothing more. Inside the ICU, Claire heard none of the exchange directly. She caught the shape of it through the glass, the posture of both men, the quality of Coulter's stillness that she recognized from a previous life as the stillness of a man receiving information that mattered. She turned back to Merritt. His eyes were open again, less strained, the sedation pulling from one direction, something else pulling from the other. His mouth moved, dry, effortful. "Did you get him?" he rasped. "He won't hurt you again," she said. Merritt swallowed, the effort of it visible in his throat. "It wasn't just him," he whispered. She looked at him steadily. His eyes found hers with the directness of a man spending whatever he had left on something that needed to be said. "Left cargo pocket," he said. "My jacket when they cut it off." He closed his eyes, sedation winning more ground than the urgency. "Before anyone else," he said. His voice was nearly gone. "Anyone." And then he was under again. Slade appeared in the doorway. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and the expression of a man in the middle of a reckoning that had no comfortable destination. "You saved him twice," he said. Quietly, no qualifiers, no professional scaffolding protecting the admission. Claire checked the arterial line without looking up. "He's not out of the woods." "No," Slade said, a pause that carried weight. "Neither are we." Outside the room, Coulter was still in the corridor. Ashe was being led away. Naval personnel moved through the wing with the methodical thoroughness of people who had been told to find things and knew how to look. The hospital around them continued its night. Other floors, other cases, other crises that knew nothing about what was happening on the 4th floor. Claire looked at the clock. 4:09 in the morning. She thought about a jacket, a cargo pocket, something Colt Merritt had considered worth spending his last conscious minutes on, fighting sedation to say it when every word cost him. She thought about what a man like Merritt would consider worth that cost, and she thought about Ash's words. "You're asking the wrong question." She moved toward the nurse's station. The jacket was in a sealed personal effects bag at the nurse's station. Standard protocol. Everything cut away in trauma. The shredded remains of a dark tactical shirt, a belt, one boot that had come off in transit, and the jacket. Heavy canvas, field-worn, the kind of garment that had been through enough conditions to carry an opinion about them. Claire found it at 4:17 in the morning. She checked the corridor in both directions, not furtively, but with the calm awareness of someone for whom monitoring a perimeter is arithmetic, not anxiety. Coulter was down the hall, speaking in low tones with the naval intelligence officer who had arrived 18 minutes ago with a badge and a sealed case and the contained urgency of a person who already knew more than they were going to say out loud. She unzipped the bag, found the left cargo pocket, reached in. The drive was the size of her thumbnail, military-grade casing, no markings, designed to survive conditions that would destroy everything around it, which told her something about how long Merritt had been carrying it and under what circumstances. She closed her hand around it, stood still in the quiet corridor with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the monitor tracing its fragile rhythm from the room at the end of the hall, and thought about what Merritt had said, before anyone else gets to it, before anyone, including, she understood, people she had spent the last 2 hours standing beside. She put the drive in her scrub pocket and walked back toward the ICU 4:31 in the morning. Coulter found her at Merritt's bedside, adjusting ventilator settings with the focused precision of someone who had already checked them twice and was checking them a third time because the numbers were the only honest thing in the room right now. He closed the door behind him. Neither of them spoke immediately. The monitor filled the silence. Outside, the city held its pre-dawn stillness, waiting for something to tip it toward morning. "Ash talked," Coulter said. Claire kept her eyes on the monitor. "What did he say?" "Enough." Coulter moved to the window. The operation wasn't designed to kill Merritt. She turned to look at him. "It was designed to move him," Coulter continued. "Create a crisis severe enough to require my personal response. Pull me out of a secured operational environment and into a civilian facility where my communications could be accessed." He paused. "The ambush, the reroute, all of it. Infrastructure built to produce exactly this situation." "Merritt was never the target," Claire said. "No. You were." Coulter didn't answer. The silence was its own confirmation. "The tampered infusion was contingency," she said. "Insurance. If Merritt survived long enough to reach medical care and say something he shouldn't, they needed him silent before he could say it. The route change, the ambush, the asset inside this building, none of it was reactive." Coulter turned from the window. 6 months of preparation for a single activation point. Ash was pre-positioned here because this hospital sits on the primary trauma route from 3 active SEAL staging points on the south side. Whoever built this network knew that if anyone from Merritt's unit survived an ambush in this part of the city, there was a high probability they'd land here. So they made sure the building was already compromised. Claire looked at him steadily. Ash wasn't improvising. No. "He walked away from that window without running," she said. "A man improvising runs. A man operating from a pre-built protocol walks. He knows the exit routes. He knows the timing. He's rehearsed it." Coulter held her gaze with the expression of a man confirming something he suspected but needed to hear from someone whose eyes he trusted. "How long did you know?" he asked. "I suspected when I saw the infusion. I was certain when he didn't run." A silence settled over the room. Outside, the city was still. Inside, the monitor kept its steady, fragile account of a heart that had decided to keep working. Then Coulter said, "Kandahar." The word carried weight that 12 years of not saying it had compressed into something dense and specific. Claire didn't look away. Kandahar. I read the after-action report, Coulter said. His voice had moved below its command register into something older. Field intelligence failure, equipment malfunction, route confusion. That's what the report said. But you left before the investigation closed, before filing a formal account. Yes. That wasn't compassionate leave converting to separation. No. He waited. We were in position for 11 minutes before they hit us, she said. A forward surgical team in a concealed location with a 6-hour operational window. Nobody finds that through malfunction or route confusion. Nobody finds it in 11 minutes. She kept her voice even. Someone gave our coordinates to people who used them. Coulter closed his eyes. One breath. The breath of a man absorbing something he had suspected for years without the evidence to act on it, and finding that confirmation was not relief. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. Then why not report it to me directly? She looked at him. Because I didn't know how deep the compromise went. I didn't know who had access to the channels that reached you. And I had just watched people die because someone inside the structure handed us over. Her voice remained level. Reporting it through the same structure that allowed it felt like finishing what they started. The truth of that sat between them without softening. So you disappeared, he said. I chose a room where I could see all the exits, she said, and where the bleeding announced itself honestly. Something moved in Coulter's face. Not a smile. The shadow of one. The expression of a man who recognizes something admirable in a decision that cost him, and cannot entirely separate the two. I spent 2 years looking, he said quietly. I know. You covered your trail well. I had good training. He nodded once, slowly. Yes, he said. You did? She gave him the drive at 4:49 in the morning, set it on the table between them, no ceremony. He looked at it, then at her. Merritt was carrying it, she said. He told me to keep it from everyone until you had it personally. Coulter reached for it, stopped, met her eyes. Including people I trust. That was his concern, and mine. He picked it up, held it for a moment in his closed hand, the expression of a man doing calculations with real names attached to them. Calculations he had been avoiding for longer than he would admit, because some of those names belonged to people he had worked beside, trusted, defended. Ash said you were asking the wrong question, she said. I know what he meant. The person who authorized this operation wouldn't be identified by asking who sent Ash, she said. They'd be identified by asking who had access to your operational schedule, your communication encryption protocols, and Merritt's route authorization, all simultaneously. That's a very short list. It narrows to one, Coulter said. He looked at the drive. His jaw tightened once, then released. Deputy Director Warren Holt, he said, quietly. The way you say something that has been true for a long time without your knowledge, and knowing it now does not make it smaller. It makes it larger, because you understand how long it was working against you. Pentagon oversight. He countersigned 3 of my last 4 operational authorizations. He had access to everything. Route planning, communication keys, staging schedules. He paused. He signed off on the Kandahar insertion as well. Claire held his gaze and said nothing. She had seen the name in the fraction of a second she held the drive before pocketing it. She had recognized it with the specific, cold clarity of a suspicion that has finally found its evidence. How long? Coulter asked. Not a question for her, a question directed at the years themselves. Long enough, she said. The documentation proves access and coordination. The rest belongs to people with subpoena authority. Coulter closed his hand around the drive. They'll have it within the hour. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression that was not quite an apology, but was assembled from the same materials. Grief, accountability, the acknowledgement of a debt that no formal reinstatement could fully settle. 12 years, he said. Kandahar, all of it. You were carrying that without institutional support. I was carrying it where I could keep an eye on it, she said. He accepted that. The way a man accepts something he cannot argue with because it is simply accurate. Dr. Howard Slade found Claire at the nursing station at 6:22 in the morning. He stood beside her without preamble, without the scaffolding of professional authority that had framed every interaction between them before 2:13 a.m. He stood the way a man stands when he has finished arguing with something and lost. "I was wrong," he said. 2 words, no qualifiers. No invitation for her to soften it or meet him halfway. Claire looked up from the chart she was annotating. "He's alive," she said. "That's what matters." Slade was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful quality of a man choosing words that he expected to cost him something. 22 years of trauma surgery. I've had residents who overstepped, fellows who confused confidence with competence. He paused. I have never been so grateful to be wrong. You made the call when the evidence demanded it, she said. That's the job. I made it 40 seconds late, and the timing held. He looked at her steadily. The man who had said, "Step back," like it was a boundary marker, who had looked at her badge and made a calculation that was entirely reasonable based on every prior experience he had, and entirely wrong. I withdrew the complaint before it was formally filed, he said. She hadn't known there was a complaint. She absorbed this without reacting. That was your call to make, she said. He nodded once, almost said something further, then didn't. He put his hands in his coat pockets and walked back toward the OR, where the next case was already being prepped, because the city kept bleeding regardless of what had happened on the 4th floor, and Howard Slade was, above everything else, a surgeon. Coulter found her near the exit at 7:03 in the morning. The helicopter on the roof had been quiet for over an hour. Naval intelligence officers had spent that hour moving through the building with the methodical efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Ash was gone, escorted out through a service exit before the first press vehicles arrived at the building's perimeter, which they had done at 6:15, drawn by the sight of a military helicopter on a civilian roof and the instinct that something worth photographing had happened near it. He stood near the exit with his jacket back on, the posture of a man about to be in motion again, taking 30 seconds to do something that wasn't. There's an offer, he said. Claire waited. SOCOM Medical Command. We'd reinstate your rank, clear the Kandahar record, everything attached to your separation, the administrative file, the fitness report, the characterization of service, corrected to reflect what actually happened, what should have been reflected 12 years ago. She looked at him. You need someone who can see it from inside a civilian room, she said. The way I saw Ash, the way I saw the bag. Someone who recognizes operational placement from the outside of a uniform. Yes, you need me here. I need you exactly where you are, he said. If they built this infrastructure at Riverside General, they built it elsewhere. Other trauma centers, other facilities on primary military transport routes. The next activation won't come with a helicopter. Claire looked down the corridor toward the ER. Through the double doors at the far end, the morning was asserting itself. Shift change, the first ordinary cases of a new day arriving, the building resuming its rhythm as though the last 5 hours had been a parenthesis rather than a revelation. It's not reinstatement, she said. No, it's something different. What is it? He held her gaze. It's trust, he said, placed where it should have been placed a long time ago. The word carried more weight than any rank or formal designation. She knew that. He knew she knew it. She thought about Kandahar, about 11 minutes, about people who had not made it out because someone inside the structure had decided they were an acceptable cost, about the years she had spent in civilian rooms learning to see the bleeding before it announced itself, learning to trust her own eyes over the hierarchy of whoever happened to be standing beside her. About tonight, about what her eyes had caught, about Colt Merritt breathing at the end of the hall. I'll stay, she said, simply, without drama. The correct answer stated plainly. Coulter gave a single, slow nod. If it follows you again, he started. It won't find me unprepared, she said. He left without ceremony, no formal acknowledgement, No commendation in front of cameras. Just a quiet departure through a service corridor into a vehicle waiting in the parking structure, carrying everything the night had produced toward whatever room that came next. The helicopter lifted from the roof at 7:14. Claire stood at the nursing station window and watched it rise into a sky going pale at the edges, the gray-pink of a winter morning over Chicago that looked completely indifferent to the question of what had happened beneath it. The rotors beat twice, 3 times, and then the aircraft found its angle and was gone, swallowed by the low cloud cover to the east. At 7:38, Colt Merritt surfaced from sedation far enough to be aware of the room. He blinked against the light, the way men blink when they've been somewhere dark for a long time, and the return is not entirely welcome. Claire was at his bedside, adjusting monitor leads. "You stayed," he said. His voice was a ruin. 3 tours of wind and radios, and the general wear of a life conducted mostly outdoors under difficult conditions. "I told you to," she said. He processed that, swallowed carefully. The drive. Coulter has it. Warren Holt's name is in federal hands. Something in Merritt's face released. The specific relaxation of a man who has been carrying a weight across a very long distance and has finally confirmed it arrived where it was supposed to. "He'll fight it," Merritt said. "He'll lose," she replied. A pause, long enough to carry meaning. "I saw you," Merritt said. "In the OR, before I went under. I couldn't hear what you were saying." He turned his head slowly toward her. "But I'd seen those hands before. Different place, different light." He looked at her steadily. "Kandahar, forward team. You were in the debrief documentation." "Different lifetime," she said. He studied her face. "You don't look different." She adjusted the blanket at his shoulder. "I am." But the steadiness in her hands said something more complicated than that, said that some things changed and some things didn't, and the line between them was not always where you expected it to be when you made the decision to walk away. Claire finished her charting at 8:02. She logged the medication correction with clinical precision, documented the IV disconnection, the physiological response, the timeline, filed the arterial line observations, entered the ventilator adjustments, everything in order. A medical record that told the honest story of what had happened to Colt Merritt's body over the past 6 hours, how close it had come, and how many times the margin had held. She set down her pen, stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the city completing its turn toward morning. Traffic accumulating on the streets below. The ordinary world resuming over the extraordinary night, the way water fills a depression, completely, and without acknowledging the shape of what it covers. Someone had tried to use this building as the final act of an operation that began 4 miles away on a street that looked like any other street. They had built the infrastructure for it 6 months in advance. They had positioned a man inside the medical staff, compromised the medication supply, planned for every contingency except one. A nurse with 7 months on her badge and a set of eyes that had learned in a previous life to see what was wrong before it announced itself. She let the weight of that settle where it belonged. Then she let it go. She picked up the next chart. Down the hall, the ER doors opened. The ordinary percussion of another morning, another arrival, another body that had decided somewhere between the street and these doors that it wasn't finished yet. Claire Novak tied her hair back, picked up her stethoscope, and went to work. Behind her, at the nursing station, an intern leaned toward the resident beside him and said quietly, "Was she military?" The charge nurse didn't look up from her paperwork. "She's a nurse," she said. Her voice carried the flat, unambiguous certainty of a woman who had been doing this long enough to know exactly what that meant. That was the only title that mattered tonight.